Our story begins with a cruise ship full of high schoolers being attacked by terrorists. On the ship, we see our main character, Amamiya Hiroto, rushing in desperately trying to save a female student who is falling overboard, only to wake up and see himself along with the entire class of Yasaka High School in an empty void, now dead. As the students try to get a grasp of their situation, we see a male student, Machida Aran, complaining about his unfortunate death as he wishes he could have played around with girls a bit more. Almost too soon, he slides in to flirt with a female student, Shimada Izumi, but she bluntly rejects his attempts and takes charge of the situation, trying to diffuse the tension and bring everyone back to their senses. She's backed up by another male student, Minami Asagi, who chants for his classmates to stay calm even though they don't have a single clue of what to expect for the future. This doesn't keep everyone's spirits high, as the classroom teacher, Murakami Junbei, comments on his students' unusually perky attitudes to them being dead. As the two go back and forth, our main character spots the girl he previously risked his life trying to save, Naruse Narumi. He laments about his attempts to rescue her, because in the end, it didn't matter since she died along with him. He admits that the two aren't close, but that doesn't mean he wanted her to die. Just then, the students hear a voice speaking to them. Another male student, Roku Odihiriji, sees a bright light appearing before them, taking the shape of a godly being named Rodcourt. Students Tsuchiya Kanako and Konode Miyaji completely act hysterical, but luckily Izumi is there to calm them down. Rodcourt tells the classroom that he would grant each of them a special power as well as a new life somewhere different than Earth, and luck of their own. Hearing this perks the ears of Hiroto, as this is his first time hearing about reincarnation. Rodcourt goes on to explain that anyone who wishes to stay on Earth is allowed to do so. However, they wouldn't be granted any special powers and their memories of the void would be erased. He then goes on to ask anyone who wishes to stay on Earth to speak up. During this, Hiroto thinks to himself about the pros and cons of being reborn and believes that being reincarnated in a different world with powers completely outweighs any pros of staying on Earth. One of the students, however, didn't think the same as our main character and offered to stay on Earth. Luckily though, everyone else chose to be born with superpowers. One by one, the gods started to call the names of the students to bless them with these special powers and transport them to another world. Hiroto assumes that it's going to be a while until his name gets called, so he sits down and begins reflecting on his life. He admits that his life wasn't all that spectacular, his parents dying when he was young, and he didn't have any friends or siblings or anyone close to him growing up. The worst part being his father's relatives, who he thought wouldn't care that he died and would probably cash out on his life insurance. These things don't bother Hiroto as much, as he begins to think of a much better life in the new world, with a loving and caring family. Just then, Rodcourt calls the name Amimiya Hiroto, and the boy steps forward. Our main guy thinks to himself how he's never noticed that student before and how it was weird how the names were so similar. And not just their names, but their appearances were weirdly identical too. Rodcourt blesses the boy with 8 special light spheres, which is way more than what he gave the previous students. And with that, he casts a spell to make everyone in the class be reborn to their new world, until he notices our main character who was left behind. Rodcourt asks our main guy his name, to which he replies Amamiya Hiroto. This makes the god realize that he made a horrible mistake, as he thought the other student, Amimiya Hiroto, was our main guy. Not only that, he basically gave away all of the special powers to the wrong guy. Rodcourt explains how he can't give him the power that he already gave away, to which Hiroto asks if he'll just start over at 0 like before. But Rodcourt says it's more complicated than that. The god goes on to explain how he was supposed to save our main character's life, but fate is cruel, so now his life will never be blessed. So basically, Hiroto thinks that there's no point in reincarnating anymore and just asks to go back to Earth. But the god tells him that that opportunity is long gone, and the chance to be reborn is almost up. Hiroto is rightfully upset and complains that he's the only one out of his class that didn't receive anything, and that now his life is destined to be full of bad luck. Rodcourt, however, does tell him that he'll be compensated by explaining how, unlike his classmates, his soul would become an empty core. And in that core, instead of strong abilities, it'll store magic. He does warn him that the compatibility with magic is extremely low, which understandably annoys Hiroto, as basically he'll be born with the capacity for magic, but unable to use any of it. Rodcourt does pity Hiroto since he can't bless him with any luck, and tells our main guy that his life is going to be full of struggling times. But at last, he gives our main guy some optimistic words before making him reincarnate. Hiroto wakes up from a violent amount of electricity shocking his body and a guard mocking him for trying to rebel. The guard leaves and talks about another experiment coming up, giving Hiroto some time to recollect his memories from his past life and cursing the god who put him in this situation. He realizes that he's been reborn into another world called Origin, that's somewhat similar to Earth except with the combination of science and magic. In this life, his mother was a prostitute and his father was an alcoholic, and they both sold him out so they could make some petty cash. Not long after being sold, he was purchased by a shady research organization who does illegal experiments. So, all in all, our guy is living the worst life possible. We jump ahead to see a scientist talking about an unordinary subject, which piques the interest of one of the two men. They take note that his magic compatibility level is extremely low, and all in all, he has no magical talent. The scientist explains how normally a person possesses 1 out of 7 elements: earth, water, fire, wind, light, life, and space. However, our main character doesn't have an ability for any of these elements. One of the scientists figures our main character is useless and suggests getting rid of him. However, the other scientist brings up how, despite his lack of affinity for the elements, he does have a huge magic source inside of his body, and that there's a possibility he just hasn't discovered that element yet. We cut to see Hiroto doing an experiment in using magic on a dead rat to bring it back to life. This amazes the scientist, who determines that his element is to control corpses. In other words, the element of death. The two scientists congratulate our guy in being the first ever death mage. Later, we see Hiroto being summoned to an office where he's surprised to see that he's been given an offer to have some sort of freedom under the condition that he agrees to be a test machine. The man explains how the facility is placing high hopes on our guy's death magic, and if he can develop a new kind of spell, he'll be given his freedom. A few days go by, and Hiroto is putting all of his efforts into creating a new spell in exchange for his freedom, which greatly pleases the scientists. However, one of them grows paranoid due to the rate that he's progressing at, to which the other scientist explains how there's nothing to worry about since they've implanted bombs inside of his body just in case he tries anything funny. Not only that, they also installed a GPS tracker, replaced his right eye with a special camera, and a secret recorder inside of his ears and mouth. They even go as far as to restrict the amount of food he eats to prevent him from getting too strong, and won't allow him to leave his room unless it's for an experiment. So, to put it lightly, they have full control over his entire body and know his every move. However, despite the insane amount of precaution, the other scientist still feels uneasy because Hiroto can use his magic at will, which could pose a threat to them in the future. The scientist with the glasses mocks his colleague by saying he's being too paranoid, but asks if he has any solutions. Later, we see Hiroto enter an unfamiliar room, and he asks about the experiments regarding developing his new spell. However, one of the scientists says how before that, they're going to do a quick examination of his body first. Hiroto does as the scientists say and lays down on a table before he becomes bound to that table. He demands to know what's going on, but a group of doctors come into the room and begin performing surgery on him. We cut to post-operation to see the scientist telling Hiroto it's mealtime, but Hiroto notices that he can't move a muscle or speak. The other scientist walks into the room to check on Hiroto, and his colleague praises the operation being a success. And now, Hiroto can't control his body, and his magic is completely disrupted. We now see Hiroto completely wheelchair-bound. The scientist with the glasses is elated about how now they have complete control over Hiroto, and his colleague mocks our main guy for being the first ever death mage who can control the dead, but not his own body, reduced to now being a puppet. Hiroto thinks to himself about his dire situation and calls out for help, but he can't do anything, and he remains completely helpless for 10 years. The next chapter opens up with the scientist in glasses escorting another scientist into the room where they keep our main character. The man is completely shocked to see the near zombie-like state he's been kept in, but more importantly, he's ecstatic to uncover the secrets behind the death mage, and perhaps even surpass his predecessors. Meanwhile, Hiroto begins to see the spirits of a woman, a little girl, and a dog. The woman begins talking to Hiroto, and the little girl turns to the scientist and asks if he's the new guy in charge of his experiments. Hiroto tells them that these scientists are rotten people and how unbearable his situation has become. The woman apologizes about how they can't help him and wonders if there's any way they can help him try to escape. But Hiroto just thanks them for simply giving him company in a place like this. The woman says she's glad and how they're thankful to him for helping them calm down, with the girl explaining how neither of them can reincarnate and were pulled here one day. Hiroto suggests that it was due to his death magic since he's able to see spirits. Maybe he summoned them. The girl goes on to explain how there's many souls wandering the facility and how they all love him and want to see him escape one day. But since they're just spirits, they can't help him at all. That's when Hiroto begins having a flashback to his old classmates and Narumi, the girl he had previously tried to save on the ship. He thinks about how they were all given powers from God, but none of them came to rescue him. Meanwhile, the young scientist is frustrated about how he hasn't been able to gather enough results over the past month, and fears being kicked from his position. He then snaps and punches Hiroto out of his wheelchair, which makes the woman spirit rush over to him. Out of desperation, the scientist begins typing at the computer in hopes of releasing Hiroto's limits and letting him reach his full capacity. Hiroto begins going into shock, and the dog and little girl spirit try to stop him, but all they can do is pass right through him. The scientist then begins to realize the insane levels of power Hiroto has, and how he's 10,000 times more powerful than the strongest mage on Earth. However, during his experiment, Hiroto is still currently going through shock and dies on the floor. The young scientist begins freaking out over accidentally killing his subject and turns away. All the while, a black aura begins pouring out from Hiroto's body. This alerts the monitor as well as the scientist as he sees Hiroto's power still increasing. The man becomes overly excited with his newfound revelation. However, before he could say another word, Hiroto snatches at the man's neck and begins choking the life out of him. Dropping the man's corpse, Hiroto starts to laugh at his newfound freedom. Not only has he gotten back his body, but his magic as well. Hiroto wastes no time and punches a hole through another man while storming out of his cell, and approaches the two scientists who were responsible for him losing his body and magic. The two scientists are completely stunned and wonder why he's even able to move. Meanwhile, the only thing Hiroto can think about is killing them for putting him through all that for the last 10 years. One of the scientists begins firing a pistol at Hiroto, but he easily slips past the bullets and sucks the life force from his body. The other scientist quickly determines that Hiroto must already be dead, and because of that, he was able to use his death magic at full potential and became an unstoppable undead mage. This revelation excites him as he praises Hiroto for his accomplishments, but our main guy decapitates him before he could finish. Hiroto laughs as he realizes that his rampage has just begun. He starts to turn on the doctors who performed surgery on him 10 years ago, and mercilessly skewers them with their own medical tools. He continues to escape from the facility, easily bypassing the bullets being shot at him, all the while realizing the excitement that comes with having full control over your own magic. He later comes across a large door and believes that there are survivors inside. He uses his magic to open the doors and stumbles into a room full of people who have been experimented on. He believes that the facility was hoping to try to recreate a death mage with these people. Hiroto restores the mobility of the kids and leads them out of the room before telling them that he'll go on ahead just in case there are more enemies. Hiroto charges on ahead and opens the door to the outside, where he sees all of his old classmates who he believes are here to rescue him. With tears in his eyes, he approaches his classmates, but they quickly go on the defensive and begin firing at Hiroto. Hiroto is completely stunned by this level of betrayal, as he thought they'd remember him being in their class. The students stopped firing as they were underwhelmed at how seemingly uneventful the battle was, as they were told an undead had broken out of the facility. Asagi, the one who told his classmates to cheer up about being dead, explains how the undead stood no chance against them, since they are 30 out of 100 heroes in the world. Narumi, the girl Hiroto tried to save on the ship, added how this one person was able to wipe out everyone at the facility and even called death magic disgusting. That's when Amemiya Hiroto steps in and suggests that the undead simply wanted to die because he was one of the experiments at the facility, to which Narumi agrees. Hiroto immediately recognizes the guy with the oddly similar name to him. Narumi and the other Hiroto decide to put our undead Hiroto out of his misery, so they try to destroy him with a powerful spell. Meanwhile, undead Hiroto is completely seething with rage at this other Hiroto who basically stole his good life, his good luck, and every blessing that God was supposed to give him in this world. However, his anger wasn't just at the other Hiroto, but at his classmates who all lived great lives while he was left to suffer, and he swore to kill them all. Narumi and the other Hiroto finish off zombie Hiroto and sent him back to God, who already suspected that he wouldn't last that long anyway. As soon as Hiroto sees God, he immediately tries to swing at him, but only phased through him. However, this didn't stop Hiroto from letting God know how he felt about being cheated in his second life. Rodcourt tells Hiroto that even though his second life sucked, he would be able to give him a much better third life, which catches Hiroto's attention. Rodcourt says that the next world will be called Lambda, and this excites Hiroto since he'll be first in line to receive some blessings and tells the god to hop on it. However, Rodcourt says that he can't give him any new abilities and sends him off. This infuriates Hiroto, and he asks Rodcourt what the big deal is, but he simply replies that he can't have Hiroto going around killing his classmates, and that the new world is a bit behind on development and it's basically up to our protagonist to build that world up with his own hands. He says to see his second life at Origin as a training period, which Hiroto refuses since it was just a living hell. He says he will never forgive God for what he's done, but before he can finish, Rodcourt places a curse on him and says that he needs to give up on his quest for vengeance. and only then will he remove all of the pain and suffering in this next life and return him to his normal reincarnation cycle. With that, Hiroto reincarnates to Lambda, where he meets an elf girl smiling down at him. She asks him to cry out every once in a while, and that's when we see Hiroto as a baby elf. The next chapter begins with Hiroto, now called Vandaloo, with his elf mother Dᴇᴇsᴛ, who is making a meal. He tries to wrap his head around his newfound life in Lambda, and how he's now an elf baby who can't speak. Later, he compares his appearance to his mother, who takes notice of it and explains that he inherited his looks from his father. We then get some history of Vandaloo's new world. In Lambda, there are elves who slightly resemble humans, and he determines that his mother is a dark elf, but he wonders about his father who isn't around. His mother continues to dote on him despite him doing things that a baby his age shouldn't be able to do. But still, Vandaloo doesn't mind her constant praises since in his previous life he never experienced the feeling of being raised by someone. Vandaloo tries to earn more praise from his mom by attempting to crawl, but he's still too young for that. His mother wonders about his stats because of his early accomplishments, which confuses our main character. That's when a status screen appears in front of him. After reading it, he realizes that he's half vampire, and thinks that his father must have been a vampire too. He begins to think about how during the last few months since he's been born, no one has ever visited their home, which strangely resembles a cave, and determined that because of his heritage, people would begin to target him. He even thinks there's a possibility his father is already dead. He goes back to his status window and sees how maxed out his magic points are and tries to use his magic skills, but nothing happens. He returns to his status window and sees how God put a curse on him to be unable to use any experience from his previous life. He's also unable to learn any jobs and unable to gain experience. Vandaloo is shocked but refuses to lay around and do nothing and tries to see if there's another way to learn magic. However, before he can start, his stomach begins to growl, and Dᴇᴇsᴛ figures it's time to feed him, much to his embarrassment. His mother notices how his fangs are starting to grow in, so in response, she butchers a rabbit right in front of Vandaloo and tells him to drink its blood. Surprisingly, our guy thinks it's pretty delicious, apart from his mother's milk. His mother warns him about drinking blood in public and to only do it around her, which makes Vandaloo realize the struggle it must have been to raise a half-blooded vampire child, and is happy that she chose to stick by him and raise him rather than abandon him. Meanwhile, while his mom is trying to swat a pesky fly, Vandaloo uses his new vampire ability, microorganism elimination, to kill it, which earns him some praise. Vandaloo realizes that in this world he's still able to use death magic. Though he's happy with his mother, he feels it's not enough, as he's determined to gain more power in order to seek revenge. He realizes that God brought him into this world to help it develop, and understands that sooner or later, his other classmates will join him in this new world. While he's deep in thought, his mother pinches his cheeks and says how he doesn't express his emotions much, to which Vandaloo thinks it's also a part of the curse God put on him. She then tells him that she loves him, but wonders if he's felt it yet. The next day, his mother takes him to the front door to test if he inherited the vampire's weakness to the sun, but luckily he didn't. With a sigh of relief, she takes him outside for a stroll, and the two enjoy their time outside, something that makes Vandaloo shed a tear, to which his mom hugs him and mentions how one day, she'll bring him back to her home village so he can be free to do anything he wants. This brings Vandaloo to admit that he loves her, and this newfound feeling makes him realize just how painful it'd be to not be able to express his true emotions. That night, Vandaloo thinks about how dangerous his life would be and how he'd want to keep his mother safe and, when he's able to talk, to be able to tell her everything. However, for a moment, he thinks about spending a happy life with his mom and how if he was able to do that, then he wouldn't need a fourth life. He then remembers what God told him before he reincarnated and made up his mind. He refused to die and live another life. He'd rather live peacefully with his mom until the end. The following day, his mother leaves him home alone while she goes to the nearby village to buy the necessities. While she's gone, Vandaloo practices his magic until she returns. But she never came back. Vandaloo wakes up from a nap only to find that his mother still hasn't come home. He begins to get a bad feeling and thinks about going out to find her. He suggests preparing for his journey and uses his magic to resurrect the rabbit using an undead summoning death spell by using a nearby wandering spirit and binding it to the rabbit's corpse to turn it into an undead. However, he realizes that one rabbit won't be enough, so he uses his magic to resurrect all of the furniture to serve him and heads out with his small undead army. Vandaloo soon reaches the town and uses one of the skeletons to help him enter the town more discreetly. Using his magic, he infuses souls into the bricks to possess them as the undead opens up an opening for him to enter. After walking around for a bit, he comes across a human soul who tells him that he saw his mother in the town square, which excites him, and he hurries over to find her. It wasn't long until he found her standing in front of the fountain and went to approach her. His mother turns around with a smile and reveals that she's now a wandering soul. Vandaloo is completely shocked. His mother explains how she's sorry that she couldn't make it home to be with him, and Vandaloo asks her what happened. His mother is shocked to be able to hear his voice, but she goes on to explain that despite her trying her best to hide him, the church eventually found her and brutally killed her. She then warns her son to flee since he'd inherited the ruby and purple-colored eyes from his parents, which will let people know that he's a dᴏᴇsᴛ. He refuses to leave her and asks who are the ones that killed her. She hesitates, but he uses his ability Mesmerizing Spell to compel her to tell him. Under his influence, his mother talks about her being ambushed by the Baronet Bastero's men, the priests, as well as a few adventurers. She fought back as best as she could, but then a guy who goes by Iridescent Sword stepped forward to fight her. His mother admitted that she ended up being captured and tortured by the church. The people of the church demanded that she reveal where her son is, but she kept quiet until the very end when the church burned her at the stake. This horrific realization made Vandaloo gain a new skill, mind corruption. He learned how he was the reason his mother died in such a painful way and was filled with regret. All the while, his new skill leveled up to level 2. Just then, the flies he can control using his magic came back to him to allow him to eavesdrop on multiple conversations around town, many of whom are the people responsible for killing his mother and talking about how she deserved to die for having a dᴏᴇsᴛ child, and how they chose to celebrate her death, and even a group of adventurers planning on hunting him down and killing him the same way they killed his mother. All of this talk fueled his anger and raised his skill level to level 7. Vandaloo thinks to himself about how cruel and disgusting the world is, and how in each of his lives he can't just have a normal life. Just then, his mother tells him that she doesn't have much time left and begins fading away. She tells him how she wishes she could watch him grow up into a man and live a wonderful life, but most importantly, to be happy. All the while, his skill continued to level up until he reached his maturity limit. He then unleashes his power in an attempt to save her and binds her soul into one of her scattered bones, and vows to give her a new body one day. With that, he goes back home with a newfound vengeance against the ones who killed her and vows to become stronger. Our chapter begins with Vandaloo back in his home staring blankly out the window. That's when the soul of his mother asks him if he's awake, to which he replies yes and talks about how tired they both must be after their long travels, with Vandaloo becoming so hungry that he resorted to drinking the blood of a raccoon. Vandaloo thinks about the promise he made to his mother about giving her a new body and tells her that he swears to one day be able to resurrect her, to which she in turn swears to stay by his side. Later on, Vandaloo talks with one of his skeletons, one he calls Skeleton Monkey, and asks him to gather the rest of his undead army to have an important meeting. There he discusses the situation of the Baronet's knights, along with the town priest who are currently searching through the forest to hunt him down. But most importantly, he talked about how 3 adventurers had supposedly already figured out where his house is and are most likely coming as they speak. He says how he currently has 30 or so skeletons in his army, and if he can plan things out right, he should be able to come out on top, although he isn't sure about the adventurer's skills and capabilities. Vandaloo then asks Skeleton Monkey to hand wrestle him for a moment so he can test out his strength, and to his surprise, he was a lot stronger than he anticipated. We then cut to the 3 adventurers trudging through the woods on the hunt for our main character. That's when one of them notices the footprint of what they think is a large monkey and a bear. They figure it's too shallow to be the footprints of those creatures, and the other asks if there's perhaps some creatures out in the woods that they don't know about. However, the leader says that's impossible, and they continue walking on until they find Vandaloo's house. One of the adventurers notices how messy the surrounding area is, which makes the leader wonder if the town knights had gotten to the child before they could. In a panic, he orders his group to search the house. That's until the ground beneath him starts to rumble and shake, causing him to tumble down a large, steep hill. Looking up, the man is horrified to see an earth golem staring down at him. However, his group yells about how it's not just the golem they should be worried about, but an entire undead skeleton army rising out of the ground. Terrified, the men run away screaming, but the leader gets his foot caught in a trap of what he believes to be a snake slithering up his foot. However, he soon realizes that it's in fact vines on their own. Before one of his friends can help him, he's knocked out by a possessed frying pan. The earth golem slowly approaches the group and knocks them out. Soon, the adventurers wake up, now tied up to trees and gagged. That's when our main guy, Vandaloo, approaches the men while riding on the shoulder of Skeleton Monkey and asks if they're finally awake. We open up with the tied-up adventurers completely baffled at how a small child has the ability to control so many undead, and how, compared to the town priest, Priest Gordon, Vandaloo and his army are covered with a pure sense of energy. Vandaloo begins to interrogate the men, but since he still can't speak properly, he just ends up speaking in baby babble, which none of the men can understand. So to make up for his lack of speech, he uses his magic to begin writing in the dirt in English. However, the men don't understand what he's trying to say, which confirms Vandalu's suspicion on the main language of this world being Japanese. He remembers back when his mother told him about how many years ago, the people of this world had to battle against a demon army, and how the god of this world summoned 7 warriors from other worlds to help them become victorious. After sealing away the demon lord, the 7 heroes passed down their native language, Japanese. Vandalu assumed that the adventurers also spoke that language and rearranged the dirt to read Japanese, which the adventurers were able to understand. Vandalu first demands that they tell him about the baronet, to which the leader of the group says how, besides running the town for 10 years, he's nothing more than an ordinary noble. Vandalu then asks about the Knights Legion, but one of the adventurers says how, despite being properly trained, they're nothing special either. He then asks about the head priest, Priest Gordon, and his holy knights. The adventurers explain how the priest and his followers only moved into town about a month ago in the search of a Dᴇᴇsᴛ child and its mother. This enrages Vandalu. The adventurer explains how the priest is known for being a powerful vampire slayer and that his strength rivals that of a Class B adventurer. One of the adventurers tries to reason with Vandalu and even get him to try to team up and spare his life if he doesn't want the priest to capture him. Vandalu orders one of his skeletons to release him, and before the adventurer can say his thanks, Skeleton Monkey grabs his face and the Dᴇᴇsᴛ child begins to drink his blood until he drops dead. He then reminds the adventurers to only tell him what he asked to know. Nothing more, nothing less. This little reminder was enough to get the remaining adventurers to obey him. Vandalu begins to understand that the leader of the iridescent sword, named Heinz, is a B-class swordsman, and the rest of his group are around C-class level. This all means that his toughest enemies yet are the priest and the leader, Heinz. The adventurers plead with Vandalu to spare their lives, to which the young child shuts them up and begins questioning why they, of all people, are pleading to live when they mercilessly slaughtered his mother and left him an orphan. He had already decided their fate, to become his food. 2 months have passed and we see Priest Gordon and his followers still searching the forest for Vandalu. One of his followers suggests that Vandalu must have escaped by now, or at the very least died. Priest Gordon reminded his follower about how the 3 D-ranked adventurers who had gone to find the child had disappeared, and even still, no one had found their bodies. His follower doesn't believe that a newborn infant could have done that to those adventurers, but Priest Gordon believes otherwise. He believes that as the days go by, that Dᴇᴇsᴛ child will grow stronger and become a real problem later. His follower argues about how it's already been 2 months since they started searching and still haven't found the kid, and they're slowly beginning to run out of resources and the people of the town are starting to show discontent. Priest Gordon says how he's well aware of their situation, but still believes he has to find the child, to which his follower yells about how there are still other vampires running around hurting people and how it's his job to protect the innocent. This starts to get through to Priest Gordon, and for now he'll give up his search for Vandalu come the following day. We see Vandalu embracing the welcoming sun after being on the run for months. 2 months ago, he discussed with his mom about where to live, since currently they're in the Bangaya continent, and that Milgu is one of the Ahmed Empire's settlements. This place isn't fond of vampires or their descendants and actively hunts them down, and because of this doesn't leave Vandalu with many options on finding shelter. And even if he's able to find somewhere to stay, he can't bring himself to rest until he's absolutely sure he and his mother are safe. He then thinks of a suitable place to hide for the time being, a huge cave. He orders his earth golems to begin digging out the cave and dress it up to make it seem like it's been collapsed. As he does, he's suddenly ambushed by the 3 souls of the adventurers he had killed, who are naturally drawn to him due to his power, and are annoyingly showering him with affection. Desperately wanting his personal space, he binds one of the souls into an earth golem and orders him to work on the cave to keep it from collapsing on them as the others dig it out for all eternity. Over the course of a few days, he continues to dig out about 50 meters of the cave and figures he should be able to survive there just fine since he has enough food and water. However, half a month later, he realized that he ran out of food and water, which forced him to survive off of earthworms and accidentally flooded the cave in search of water. After who knows how many days of misfortune, he wasn't sure if he'd be able to continue on like this, but in the end, he was able to make it back out and see the sun. He waddles back to his army, but stops to look up at the sky and wishes that the iridescent sword party and Priest Gordon to still be alive so he can kill them himself. Later, Vandalu begins training his skeleton army, but suddenly realizes that he has no idea how to do that. Since they're a bunch of walking bones, they don't need to develop speed or strength, and they're not that adept at weapons training either. He then remembers how people can gain experience in this world, like swordsmen, farmers, and blacksmiths. He then wonders how the undead can gain skills. Vandalu runs into a goblin and orders his army to kill the creature. He figures that in the end, the undead are still a type of monster and should gain experience by killing other monsters. And since he himself is unable to gain experience thanks to God's curse, he'll have to rely on his army to protect him so he doesn't have to go into hiding ever again. After killing the goblin, all of his skeleton army members level up, and Vandaloo levels up to 3. Confused, Vandaloo checks his status window and wonders how he was able to level up despite still having the curse. He determines that as his army levels up, some of their experience transfers over to him, and he'll be able to level up through them, effectively finding a loophole in God's curse. After burying the goblin, Vandaloo focuses on leveling up the skeleton man, skeleton monkey, skeleton wolf, vulture, and bear as his primary bodyguards. Months go by, and Vandaloo turns a year old, and his mother and skeleton army celebrate around a campfire. Vandaloo thinks back to his first life as Hiroto and how his family never celebrated his birthday, as they thought that by doing that, they would spoil him and make him a weak man. We return to Vandaloo explaining to his mother how he's not used to celebrating his birthday, and is happy that he's able to do it for the first time with people who care about him. He also explains that since he's able to talk properly, he can finally communicate normally without having to use his magic, and even learned a new spell, Chant Cancel, which allows him to cast spells without needing to chant, which surprises his mother. Vandaloo also explains that over the course of their training, his skeleton army was able to level up and become bone monsters now. His mother congratulates him and wonders if they'll be able to escape the forests, but Vandaloo doesn't think it's a good idea quite yet. But he does say that his army should be strong enough to exact his revenge, though he still isn't sure what to do after that, since he'll still be at risk of being hunted down for being a Dhampir. So he concludes that he should go hunt bandits to level up. His mother was supportive at first, until she realized what her son said and immediately objected. Vandaloo explains to her that despite killing a bunch of monsters, Bone Monkey and the others haven't leveled up, and thinks that they instead should start killing bandits to fix that problem. Of course, he doesn't see it as a bad thing since he'll be killing criminals, but his mother insists that it's too dangerous. However, our main guy says that he'll launch a surprise assault, and he has a few bandits in mind of who to start with. We cut to a group of bandits celebrating in a cabin in the woods and drinking. Then one of the subordinates tells his boss about how recently some of their own have been going missing in the woods lately, and thinks it has something to do with the nearby lord of the land. However, the boss just laughs it off. Meanwhile, we see Vandaloo looking down at the cabin, accompanied by the soul of the man who the bandits murdered previously who led him there. The man pleads with Vandaloo to avenge him and his daughters, to which he agrees. Vandaloo explains how over the past month, he and his army have been wiping out lesser bandits, but figures that the main group in the cabin would be a lot tougher and fight with combat ability. However, despite that, he's come prepared. We open up this next chapter with a couple of bandits talking amongst themselves, when suddenly one of them gets shot in the neck with an arrow and tumbles off of the guard post. We cut to see Vandaloo standing with Bone Man who fired the shot. This alerts the other bandits of them being ambushed as they see Vandaloo and his army storming the camp. The leader of the bandits tries to get his men to calm down and instruct them to switch their weapons to axes and maces to kill the monsters, and led the retaliation against Vandaloo's army. One of the bandits goes up against the bone bear and attempts to attack it, but the creature grabs and crushes his body with a literal bear hug. All the while, the bone monkey leaps down from the trees in the middle of a group of bandits and effortlessly kills his opponents. The bone wolf then attacks another bandit and mauls him, while the human bone man unsheaths his sword and mows down enemies in his path. The bandits begin to retreat as they've never faced off against monsters like these before. Their boss encourages them to keep fighting, while at the same time he's thinking about sacrificing his men as a distraction while he escapes. While his men are fighting the bone beasts, the boss slips away and makes a beeline to the merchant's wagon, but gets cut off by Vandaloo raising an earth wall in front of him. The boss finds himself cornered by Vandaloo and the souls of the innocent man's daughter he'd previously tortured while they were still alive. Vandaloo commands his bone bear to his side, which forces the bandit to begin pleading for his life, and even surrendering to Vandaloo and offering himself to be a human ally. Unfortunately for the bandit, Vandaloo doesn't see any use for him and orders his undead ally to kill him quickly. Meanwhile, the rest of the bandits flee and unintentionally start kicking over the vulture bone beast, who still hasn't acquired any combat skills, and since it's a skeleton, it can't fly either. The creature becomes sad after hearing that, but Vandaloo tries to cheer it up by saying maybe once it levels up enough, it can fly. After the battle, Vandaloo uses life detection to check the cabin for any survivors and detects someone inside. He asks the soul of the bandit boss who it was, and he explains how it's a merchant they'd captured a few days ago who turned out to be a member of a wealthy family, so they tried to hold him for ransom. Vandaloo becomes intrigued and enters the house, where we see a young boy locked inside of a cage. Vandaloo uses Spirit Flame to free the young boy and tells him that all of the bandits who captured him are all dead. With that, he warns the boy to never mention that they met, and he turns to leave, thinking that it would be smarter to leave no witnesses. But at the same time, he doesn't want to stoop to the bandits' level about killing innocent people. Besides, he knows sooner or later his classmates will reincarnate into this world one day, and he doesn't want them to kill him out of justice. The merchant boy follows Vandaloo out of the cabin and is glad that Vandaloo, despite looking like a ghost, is just a kind child. That is until he sees his army of undead surrounded by the corpses of the bandits. And that's when Vandaloo warns the boy that if he ever told anyone that they've met, his undead army will hunt him down. The next day, Vandaloo is with his mother inside of the bandit camp as they raid it for all of their valuables. His mother asks him if he's going to wave the merchant child off, but he figures that his skeletons can do that for him. Besides, at the very least, he returned all of his stuff back to him, so he thinks that should be more than just enough from him. After all, the kid is just a stranger to him. Vandaloo thinks about using the bandits' leftover food for cooking a meal for himself, but his mother objects and says that he's only a 1-year-old and shouldn't be cooking at all. Vandaloo tries to explain to his mother that he's a lot tougher than a normal 1-year-old and he can use magic to cook, but she isn't hearing any of it and reinforces the fact that it doesn't matter how much power he has, he's still just a baby and should listen to her, which he does in the end. Afterwards, Vandaloo says that they should load up their loot into the wagon, but his mother asks how they're going to drive the wagon since Vandaloo gave the only horse to the merchant child. That's when the soul of the man who was murdered by the bandits offers to drive them since he was a carriage driver and a horse trainer in his previous life, to which Vandaloo agrees. After taking control of the wagon, the man is able to steer it with ease and provides Vandaloo and his mother a ride. And with that, they set off. We see the Baron relaxing and enjoying a glass of wine, while his servant is congratulating him on his status promotion. The Baron thinks nothing of it and relishes in the good luck and prosperity his town now thrives in after the death of the dark elf they killed. Not only that, but the reports of bandits and social order has drastically decreased, as well as the disease problems seemingly solving themselves overnight. Truly, they're basking in a new era of peace and wealth as luck seems to be on their side. Meanwhile, Vandaloo gives an order to destroy it, which simultaneously causes the structure of a brick wall to collapse in front of a group of patrolling guards. The bricks seem to gather themselves and form a large towering creature with glowing eyes that lets out a trembling screech. On the ground, the guards scurry around out of confusion as they're unsure of what's making the ground shake beneath them. The captain of the guards demands to know what's going on, and that's when one of his men informs him that the outer wall randomly turned into a giant golem. The captain orders for his men to stop panicking and to attack, but one of his guards pointed out how the creature is showing no interest in them, but instead just turns and walks away. The captain doesn't want to hear his excuses, since without the wall, how will they be able to protect the town from bandits and creatures? The guard wants to comply, but asks even if they wanted to, they don't know how to stop a creature like that. The captain was about to yell in response, but came to the realization that he also doesn't know how to stop the creature. Instead, he orders his men to get going. Next, we cut to one of the servants rushing towards the Baron to report the catastrophe, but before he could, the entire house began to shake, making the Baron think it's an earthquake or something. The servant then urges the noble to leave the estate. Just as he does, the noble turns around to see his entire house being broken down and morphing into another giant golem. The creature takes his first steps away from the town, nearly crushing the Baron under its feet as it did. The servant rushed to the Baron's aid as the creature continued to walk away, and the noble demanded to know where the knights and explorers from the guild had gone. Unfortunately, the servant replied how even the buildings of the guild had turned into a golem and walked away. However, even more importantly, the wine and wine sellers also got up and walked away. This news devastates the noble as he was a particular fan of his fancy wine. The only thing he's left with now is no wine, no guild, and heaps of rubble. Meanwhile, on the top of a nearby house, we see Vandaloo spectating the chaos he's caused, watching as the people of the town run around in distress as their buildings and materials suddenly got up and walked away. Still, Vandaloo is pleased with himself, his plan being how every night he snuck into town and placed a golem in various places, waiting for the right time to strike. He's proud of himself for his plan working out the way he wanted. He turns to his mother saying how the people who laughed at her are now running in fear, to which she thanked him for everything he's done. She even compliments how hard he worked for his proper revenge. This makes him stop and think it's true that if it weren't for Heinz and Priest Gordon, Vandaloo would have just killed everyone in town. Instead, he destroyed their town but questions why he left them alive. He tells his mother that he isn't sure how long it'll take to revive her, but he says how it'll also take the townsfolk years to rebuild everything that they've lost. His mother says that it's fine since, in the end, he spared them and gave them another chance. She goes in to pet his head but hesitates for a moment. In the end, she shows him affection and smiles at him. This feeling makes Vandaloo remember how she'd used to pat his head all the time when he was much younger. He thinks about what she told him about proper revenge, and swears that the people who killed her don't deserve that and that one day he'll kill them with his own hands. With that, he flies back down to the wagon with the help of the skeleton bird, who's now a phantom bird, rank 3. We see Dᴇᴇ and another vampire trudging through the scorching hot desert. Dᴇᴇ becomes overwhelmed by the harshness of the environment and nearly collapses, but is luckily caught by the vampire named W쏘ɪrᴛ. She apologizes for slowing the two down, but he tells her not to worry and suggests that the two take shelter under a large rock. During their break, W쏘ɪrᴛ apologizes for dragging her through the desert, even though she's currently pregnant. He then swears that he'll protect the two of them even if it costs him his life. And Dᴇᴇ lays down, thanking him but says that he can't die. She says that the three of them should run away, to which W쏘ɪrᴛ agrees. He then asks Dᴇᴇ about what they should name their child. Jumping back to the present, we see the merchant wagon strolling through an open field. Dᴇᴇ then explains the 4 different types of vampires in the world. Firstly, the vampire born between the goddess Vita and the undead hero Z'Cart, known as the True Ancestor. However, they've already perished long ago and their name was lost to time. The second type are the purebloods, who are either the direct descendant of the True Ancestor or they've received their blessing. Underneath them are the nobles to the purebloods, whose bloodline was thinned over time. And lastly, underneath them are the subordinates, who were created by giving blood. She concludes by saying the closer one is to the True Ancestor, the more power you'll have. However, a common weakness amongst vampires is their weakness to sunlight, their life attribute magic, and their need to sustain themselves off of blood. W쏘ɪrᴛ asks if his father was subordinate and served the purebred vampire, to which his mother says that he was. In the beginning, he was a human who lived in the slums, a thug from the slums as he used to say. This news conflicts with how W쏘ɪrᴛ expected his father to be, given how proudly his mother talked about him before. She further explains how his father was still an amazing man. He had resistance to the sun unlike all other vampires. W쏘ɪrᴛ figures that his natural resistance to sunlight wasn't because he didn't inherit the weakness, but instead because of his father's natural resistance. Dᴇᴇ goes on to explain how his father was valued by his pure-blood vampire master because of his sunlight resistance, and was ordered to do various tasks in the society, like doing back-alley deals and gathering info. And that's when the two first met. Dᴇᴇ flusters over how the two first met, to which W쏘ɪrᴛ insists his mother fell for a womanizer. She goes on to explain how, over time, she became pregnant with W쏘ɪrᴛ, but simply mixing the vampire blood with another race infuriated his father's master, and he ordered for their execution. Out of desperation, his father took both of them and ran away, luckily being about to run throughout the day as the other vampires couldn't follow them. However, as the months passed, their escape became more and more difficult, with her growing stomach as well as for his father, who was busy trying to keep both of them safe. Still, even during all of that, Dᴇᴇ never felt anxious while she was with W쏘ɪrᴛ's father. She had a fun time. We see Dᴇᴇ and W쏘ɪrᴛ discussing what to name their child in the middle of the desert. Dᴇᴇ asks why he wants to give their child a name, since neither of them know whether it's going to be a boy or a girl. But W쏘ɪrᴛ insists that they should start coming up with names before the baby comes. W쏘ɪrᴛ goes on to think of names and suddenly comes up with an idea to give part of his name to his child. Dᴇᴇ agrees and suggests that they should combine the two, and W쏘ɪrᴛ agrees wholeheartedly. Dᴇᴇ suggests the name Varcia if it's a girl, and W쏘ɪrᴛ agrees with it. He then starts to think of a name for a boy. Suddenly, it begins to rain and the two enter a seemingly vacant town where they're approached by shady-looking hooded men. The men immediately pull out their weapons, and W쏘ɪrᴛ shouts for Dᴇᴇ to run while he holds them off. Dᴇᴇ pleads for him to come with her since he doesn't stand a chance against 3 vampires, but he shouts for her to hurry up and go. With tears welling up in her eyes, she turns and leaves him behind. W쏘ɪrᴛ carries a smile on his face, knowing that his love and their child will be safe. He then charges towards the vampires. We now see Wząɪrᴛ in the wagon with his mother, talking about his father's final moment. Dᴇᴇ explains how it was because of his father that she was able to run away towards the forest and give birth to him. As she was laying next to her newborn, she smiles while thinking of W쏘ɪrᴛ and calls her son Wząɪrᴛ, the name his father wished for him to have. Dᴇᴇ asks Wząɪrᴛ if he likes the origin of his name, to which he replies that he does. His mother is glad that he does and remembers that she was originally talking about the vampires. Meanwhile, Wząɪrᴛ thinks to himself about the numerous times she had already told him the story of his father, and thinks that her memory is beginning to break down. He compares her situation to Sam, the man who died at the hands of the bandits, and thinks about how he died with strong resentment. But for his mother, it's as if he'd forcefully stopped her from dying peacefully. If he were to leave her alone, it wouldn't be out of the ordinary had she disappeared. She looks to the piece of bone where he bound her soul and thinks if he'd put in more magic, he should be able to keep her situation stable. But in order to keep her mother's soul, he needs to find her a new body. Just then, the wagon hits something outside, and Wząɪrᴛ asks what happened. But Sam reassures him that he'd only hit a goblin on the road. Wząɪrᴛ says how he's unable to level up from goblins and would prefer to be level 3 by the time he reaches the mountains. His mother reminds him that even at level 2, he's already strong enough, since it usually takes a whole group of people to take down a goblin, to which he agrees but says how that the place they're going is full of unordinary people, and would like to, at the very least, level up everyone else. We then see that a few days ago, the group had made a stop inside of a cave where Dᴇᴇsᴛ explains how they shouldn't go to the Dark Elf village without her, since without her being there, V:andaloo wouldn't be able to prove he's half Dark Elf due to his appearance. He agrees and suggests that they should instead stay in a place that is enemies with those who hunt Dᴇᴇirs, to which his mother suggests the Orbom Kingdom, since their religion conflicts with the main religion of Alda that the hunters practice. She also assumes that Orbom might treat Dᴇᴇirs differently compared to those in the Amid Empire. Though she herself has never been there, she says how there are beastmen and giants who are dukes there, so her son should be fine at the very least. V:andaloo can't be too sure, but he knows for a fact he can't keep living in caves, so he agrees to his mother's plan and they begin to make their way to the Orbom Kingdom. Cutting back to the present time, the wagon makes a quick stop and V:andaloo announces how he'll take a nap during the day. Just then, a man approaches the wagon, startling Sam, but V:andaloo assures him that it's just a broken spirit who is attracted to his powers. The man calls the boy rude and offers him some special information, to which V:andaloo questions the man's identity. He replies how he was a spy for the Amid Empire, but was killed before he was able to give away the information. Then, out of nowhere, the man becomes weirdly persistent to tempt V:andaloo into hearing the super secret information he's offering. V:andaloo reluctantly agrees to hear the man out. Later, the man feels a wave of refreshment after telling V:andaloo and peacefully passes on. His mother asks him if he was just talking to someone, and he responds that he was and informs her of the impending war between the Amid Empire and the Orbom Kingdom. This further complicates things for the group, as with the war brewing, if they were to approach the Orbom Kingdom, instead of being stopped and questioned for being outsiders, they'll most likely end up being attacked. V:andaloo figures it can't be helped, and orders Sam to head southeast from the border and cross southeast from there and to make their way into Orbom. Sam is hesitant to travel there, since southeast from here is full of high mountains infested with monsters. And these monsters are so dangerous that adventurers, or rather, any human at all, doesn't dare step foot in there. He even adds that that place is where Zakhart died. V:andaloo is well aware of the dangers, but he figures it's a lot better than running into any humans. Sam reluctantly agrees and obeys Vandaloo's orders. Their next destination is right into the Devil's Nest, where no human has ever gone. Before they could travel too far, the wagon stops and Sam calls for V:andaloo to look outside, where he finds a gate of some sort. Sam corrects him and says that it's a dungeon, a natural den that harbors monsters because the land above is polluted with magic. V:andaloo asks if they've already reached Devil's Nest, but his mother doesn't believe so since there are hardly any monsters around, and believes that the monsters in the dungeon must be weaker compared to the ones closer towards the Devil's Nest. V:andaloo suggests that they should stop by the dungeon, which puzzles his mother since he's behaving unusually casually about walking into a dungeon. Despite the monsters being weaker than the ones at the Devil's Nest, it doesn't change the fact that it's still a dangerous place. V:andaloo says that he understands, but he also sees the pros of going inside so he can level everyone up, so that when they face stronger enemies in the Devil's Nest, then they'll be able to navigate more safely. Dᴇᴇsᴛ is still hesitant, but Sam adds that he agrees with V:andaloo and vows to protect him at all costs. Dᴇᴇsᴛ becomes more accepting of the plan, but also makes him promise that he'll stay safe since she can't protect him. He agrees and assures her that he'll have Bone Monkey along with everyone else at his side. With that, V:andaloo and his group storm in to conquer the dungeon. Once inside, Sam begins mowing down all of the goblins in his path, something that makes him say that this dungeon is a lot less dangerous than he anticipated. V:andaloo asks him how so, to which his mother explains that the dungeon may be newly established and that no one has tried entering it yet. Sam questions that if someone had seen the dungeon, would they leave it unexplored? Dᴇᴇsᴛ explains that the dungeon was probably not worth conquering, which V:andaloo agrees as he says how humans don't take action unless there's something to benefit from it. Sam remarks on how wise V:andaloo is and wonders if it has something to do with him being reincarnated as he'd explained to him before, and warns him not to act so adult-like in front of others. V:andaloo admits that he does act more mature despite his physical age, but he will pass on using baby words to hide his mental maturity. V:andaloo then brings up how formal Sam is with him and asks him not to refer to him as Master. Sam suggests that he'll call him Young Master since he's a year old, but V:andaloo didn't mean it that way either. His mother adds that there aren't many spirits Sam could talk to since the bone creatures are the souls of animals so they can't speak, though we're not sure about the Bone Man. And as for the souls of his daughters, Rita and Saria, since they're being controlled by the fear they suffered before they died, they're unable to speak as well. Sam begins to wonder if anything can be done about that, but he loses his train of thought when V:andaloo asks him if something's bothering him. Sam only replies that he's here to serve V:andaloo, so it's normal for him to admire him. The group continues on until Dᴇᴇ tells Sam that she needs to rest and that she leaves the safety of her son into his hands. Before she goes, Dᴇᴇ tells Vandaloo goodnight and disappears back into the bone. They continue on until they come across some more stairs and begin traveling upward, and all the while, Vandaloo assumes that his team should be able to clear the dungeon in no time. However, he's completely unaware of the final boss of the dungeon, waiting at his throne for him. The skeleton army is busy pushing Sam's wagon up the long flight of stairs. That's when the team is ambushed by some poison frogs, forcing Vandaloo and his army to retaliate with full force. However, they didn't need to do much, as Sam easily ran the creatures over. He goes on to express his enjoyment in crushing monsters, something that Vandaloo doesn't mind as long as he doesn't crash the wagon. Later, the group finally reaches the 4th floor of the dungeon. As they explore the dark cave, an army of undead knights emerge from the ground with their weapons in hand. Sam suggests that they should retreat, something that Vandaloo agrees to until the undead soldiers stand in a line to salute the young boy. Vandaloo watches on in shock as he wasn't expecting this. The undead soldiers even cast their weapons away to show their loyalty to our protagonist. Still, after being given a free pass to continue on, Vandaloo and his team cautiously pass through as Vandaloo assumes that it's not a trap and uses his sense danger skill, just to make sure there's no funny business. Sam praises Vandaloo for being able to bend an entire undead army to his will, but he explains how it has something to do with his death attribute charm. Although he didn't think it would affect the undead that he didn't create. Still, he orders Sam to make a small stop for a lunch break. Vandaloo begins to cook the frog legs he'd collected from the poison frog monsters, but his mother quickly shut that idea down, and made Vandaloo pass the cooking off to Bone-Monkey. After multiple failed attempts in starting a fire, Bone-Monkey was finally able to prepare the frog legs for Vandaloo. As they all ate, Sam began talking about his past life with his 2 daughters. Despite serving a noble, they lived humbly, which didn't bother them in the slightest. He goes on to talk about his wife who'd passed not too long ago, and the unfortunate death of their lord, leaving them with not many options left but to hopefully start over in a big city. However, tragedy struck as they were attacked by those bandits and lost their lives. Sam looked to the souls of his daughters, and wished for Vandaloo to save them as he had done for him. Vandaloo notices Sam's sullen look, which made the man overly express his gratitude to the young boy, but Vandaloo had a feeling that he knew what the man was thinking as he looked at the souls of his daughters. Later, the group ventured deeper into the dungeon while being given a free pass by the undead monsters to journey on. Vandaloo eventually comes across a secret chest and opens it using his magic. Inside, he finds a legendary health potion that can cure most wounds. He decides to keep the potion and continues on inside of the dungeon, again with a generous escort by the undead creatures. They eventually walk into a dark, quiet room. Suddenly, the door is slammed shut behind them as an army of living armor rose up from the ground, seemingly waiting for the protagonist and his crew. Leading the army of possessed armor was a level 5 giant skeleton general. Everyone is terrified by the monster. However, Vandaloo notices something strange about the general and recklessly approaches it. The skeleton general readies his weapon and approaches the child, while Vandaloo steps to the level 5 creature with his army of bone monsters right behind him. The general raises his large, blunt weapon at Vandaloo, and then politely offers it to our protagonist, something that not even his own bone army saw coming. As usual, his mother praises her son for taking down a level 5 boss monster without a fight. Vandaloo takes the boss's weapon and offers it to Bone Man, and in exchange, he uses his magic to level up the general to a Black Skull General rank 6. Everyone is overwhelmed by the talent the young boy possesses, to which Vandaloo simply explains how he only raised the general's strength by 10,000. After that, Vandaloo thinks about using his magic to make living armor and add them to his army, to which Sam eagerly offers his daughters, explaining how if his girls had bodies, then he'd finally be able to talk to them. Vandaloo agrees and looks around for some suitable armor. Luckily, he finds a treasure room where he finds some in a chest that actually resembles more of a woman's bikini than actual armor. Sam explains how the armor set is actually magic-imbued metal armor specifically for women, and begs Vandaloo to bind his daughters to them. Vandaloo is hesitant to put his daughters in such armor, but eventually gives in and binds the souls of his daughters to the armor. The spell performs successfully. However, his daughters still can't speak. But Vandaloo explains how they would need to level up before being able to speak. Vandaloo is still puzzled how such armor could exist in this world, but notices how, despite the appearance of it, Sam is just happy that he's able to reconnect with his daughters again. In the end, Vandaloo says it doesn't really matter. We open up this next chapter with a group of adventurers fighting against the Black Skull General in the dungeon. With a single swing of his weapon, he was able to knock back most of the adventurers, nearly defeating them in a single blow. The leader of the adventurers group tries to keep calm and coordinate his team's attacks precisely. All at once, the group attacked until the leader struck the final blow, finally killing the boss. Exhausted and pushed to the brink of collapsing, the group celebrated their victory and went searching for the loot. However, one of their members informs the leader that there's not a single piece of treasure anywhere. This obviously infuriates the leader as he curses the person who'd beat them to the dungeon and stole everything. Simultaneously, Mđāļu sneezes. He's busy overlooking the progress of Rita and Saria, who are training with their new weapons against Bone Man. Mđāļu questions if they should be using a spear and halberd respectively since they're beginners, but Sam doesn't think it'll hinder them in any way, as he sees them trying their best to become stronger so they can serve Mđāļu. Mđāļu reluctantly agrees but doesn't want to force the girls to do something they don't want to. But Sam reminds him that since they don't have a physical body, it won't be as if they could get hurt. Mđāļu agrees with him and calls the girls over and attempts to help them to get stronger using his magic. However, he doesn't think it worked. Sam questions this, and Mđāļu suggests that there must be some requirements he has to meet in order to level up someone like he did with the boss. Just as he turned away, Rita and Saria ask him to try again, assuming that it must have worked in some way. But Mđāļu rejects this, as he wants them to level up properly before trying again. After training, Mđāļu begins trying to make some walnut sauce with the guidance of his mother and an earth golem he created to assist with the fire. His mother noted how Mđāļu inherited his claws from his father, and Mđāļu agrees as he thinks it could be useful for him in the future. After he mentions that, his mother asks him what he plans to become in the future. The boy gives a straightforward answer: to become a high-leveled adventurer, gain lots of achievements, and become a noble. His mother thinks he has a lot of ambition, but asks if that's all he wants. To which Mđāļu questions this, as he thinks that there's nothing more he could possibly want other than ultimate status. He believes that with great status, then no one can ever hurt him again, which his mother nervously agrees to. However, she asks what his plans are after all of his enemies are gone. This stumps Mđāļu, since he never thought that far ahead. After thinking for a long time, he answers that he would want to live a happy life. Darcia asks him what does a happy life mean to him. He answers something like a cozy family, social status, and a luxurious lifestyle. His mother comments about how he really desires to become rich, but Mđāļu explains how it's not like that. He would just like to have the ability to buy whatever he wants and simply have freedom to exist in the world. He then thinks back to his first life as Hiroto in a classroom. He's taking a test when he accidentally drops his pencil and a classmate behind him picks it up, and teases him for having such a small, dulled pencil. Hiroto begs for his classmate to give it back since it's the only pencil he has left and all of his other pencils are all used up, but chooses to save them all until they've become completely useless. He asks for him to give it back, but instead of giving it back, his classmate offers him his own pencil with a character sticker on it. He apologizes for laughing at him earlier and allows him to take it home. Hiroto is grateful for the gesture and goes home to complete his homework with a warm smile. However, a family member of his snatches the pencil away, assuming it was a toy, snaps it in half, and tosses it into the trash. With a heavy slap to the boy's face, Hiroto's relative begins insulting him and reminds him that he's forbidden to have any toys since it'll just make him weaker in the future. We now see Mđāļu looking sullenly into the completed walnut sauce. His mother praises him for his hard work, and Mđāļu replies that he doesn't know what it means to live a luxurious life yet, but he'll think about it more when they reach the Orbom Kingdom. The group continues onwards when Sam notices that winter is coming in earlier than expected. Mđāļu suggests that they should halt their travels and live off of killing bandits and wild animals until spring, something that Sam is all too eager to agree to. He mentions how since the group entered the dungeon, he was able to rank up and even acquired spirit ghost horses to pull the carriage. As the group continues on, they hear the screams of a girl and Mđāļu smells the scent of blood. Sam asks Mđāļu what his next action would be, and the boy contemplates his options before sending Bone Vulture to scope out the scene. Looking through the eyes of Bone Vulture, Mđāļu is able to see a group of men surrounding an unconscious young girl and getting ready to violate her. This makes Mđāļu come to a decision: kill them all. Although he is prioritizing to rescue the girl, if she were to become a liability and spill anything about the group, Mđāļu will personally shut her up. Now going towards her at full speed, Mđāļu and his team will fight for justice. We open up with a small tribe being taught how to differentiate the herbs out in the wild by the chief Zadiris. One of the tribe members, Vild, doesn't see the importance of learning any of this since there's tons of edible plants near their village and doesn't see why they have to learn the plants out near the demon territory. Zadiris explains that despite their bountiful amount of herbs near their village, she believes that it's still important to know the unfamiliar herbs outside of their territory, in case of an emergency and they have to flee. She also says that with this information, then they won't have to waste their time exploring the wilderness. Her tribe members agree with her while also admiring her cuteness, despite the fact that she's the eldest of them. Zediris tries to get them to stay on track for their lesson, as she thinks to herself how she doesn't have much time left to live since she's the village elder, and wants them to learn as much as possible from her so she doesn't have to worry about them after she passes. Zediris continues to teach them about herbs and which ones to use for healing others when suddenly she hears the footsteps of an intruder. An arrow is fired at her but misses just barely. It's revealed that a group of adventurers who had been tracking them for a while had finally found them. They all charge towards the girls, but Zediris uses her magic to fend off her tribe members using her growls. One of the adventurers casts a net over the other members, but they swiftly defended themselves and Zediris quickly cast a blinding spell on the men. She turns to her tribe members and urges them to flee. They obey her and run past the stunned men, but Vild notices that her chief is choosing to stay behind. Zediris assures them that she'll be fine and tells them to leave her behind. With tears in their eyes, the girls run away and Zediris is left to face off against the men. The adventurers try to run after the fleeing girls, but the leader of the group says to let them go since their real prize is the chief, since she has a much higher magic level compared to the other three, and would fetch a higher price on the slave market. Zediris leads the men away from her tribe members as best as she can, but her old age starts to catch up with her, as she's not as strong as she used to be. The men continue to chase her and fire arrows at her, but they all end up missing. Zediris continues to flee while thinking about how to lose them, but she accidentally falls off the side of a cliff and is sent tumbling down. Left beaten and weakened on the ground, Zediris figures she'd die an honorable death since she'd sacrificed herself to save others. And at the very least, someone else can take over as chief. The 5 men eventually catch up to her and kick her over to her back, admiring her rather alluring beauty. They begin discussing how much they'd be able to make off of her if they sell her off. This upsets Zediris and she screams at him, revealing that she understands their language, and she lunges for his throat. Caught off guard, the man quickly reaches for his sword and plunges it into her body. The overwhelming pain sends Zediris into shock as she collapses onto the ground and screams in agony. As the other adventurers hold her down, the man who stabbed her tells her that the sword used was a magic item imbued with pain up status, explaining how she'll suffer 3 times more pain than usual. One of the adventurers figures that they should indulge in their sick pleasures as payment for all the effort it took to catch her. The man twists the blade deeper into Zediris' body and discovered a merchant wagon charging straight towards them. On the wagon, Bone Man fires another arrow at the men but misses his target. Vandaloo then casts a magic-absorbing field around the adventurer mage, preventing him from finishing his spell. Sam warns for the men to surrender or he'll run them all over with his wagon. The men scatter at the sight of the barreling wagon, and Sam confronts the adventurers while unknowingly flinging Vandaloo off of the wagon. The battle commences with Vandaloo's undead army against the human adventurers. The Bone Army proves themselves to be more than what the adventurers were initially expecting. However, the men began pushing back against Vandaloo's army, first pushing Bone Man into a tree and another adventurer slicing the arm off of Bone Monkey. The leader of the group asks the mage to cast some support spells, but he replies how he can't inside the magic absorption field. Vandaloo notices how the mage was able to figure out how his spell works, but figures that it wouldn't do them much good since no matter how badly they fight against his skeleton army, it wouldn't make much of a difference. He says how it was a hopeless battle for them the moment they lost their mage. One of Sam's daughters charges straight for the leader of the group and nearly swings her spear at his neck, but the man dodges. However, he began to notice that the girl has no combat ability and is just swinging her weapon around. Still, he's unsure of how to defeat her since she doesn't have a body or obvious weakness. Despite that, out of desperation, he reaches for his blade and aims in the center of the girl's chest, accidentally snapping her chest armor. Embarrassed, the girl tries covering herself, even though no one is able to see her. Unfortunately for the man, this enrages Sam as he rushes in full speed at him and runs him over with the wagon, sending him tumbling across the field. The battle ends with the bandits defeated and Sam apologizing for losing his cool during the fight and flinging the young boy out of the wagon earlier. But Vandaloo says it's fine since he had advanced healing abilities. He looks to his Bone Army and notices how much damage they all sustained and figures that the adventurers were a lot tougher than he expected. Still, he takes this as a lesson to be learned for when he'll later encounter higher-leveled fighters like Heinz. Sam asks Vandaloo that despite figuring the adventurers would be higher level, he'd still risked everything to save the girl. Vandaloo thinks back to what happened to his mother and Sam's daughters and replies, of course he would. However, next time he'll set up an ambush. Vandaloo turns to Zediris and notices the magic blade still lodged in her body. He neutralizes the blade's magic and assures her that he'll be able to heal her wounds. Sam asks how he's able to do that since he can only use death magic, but Vandaloo reminds him of the healing potion they acquired from the dungeon. Vandaloo returns to Zediris and quickly pulls out the blade and cleans her wound with the potion, healing her instantly. Zediris sits up and Vandalou introduces himself to her and offers a towel, but she doesn't respond. Instead, she zones out completely. He suspects that after what happened to her, it would make sense that she wouldn't speak to him, and thinks that if it were his mother or Sam's daughters, maybe they could get through to her since they're all women. However, Sam and his daughters cheer for him from the sidelines to break the ice with Zediris. Vandalou admits that despite living through 3 lives, he still lacks experience talking to women and doesn't know how to talk to someone who is almost assaulted. Still, he tries to make small talk with her, until she unexpectedly throws herself on him and begins to cry. Vandalou wants to comfort her as best he can, but Zediris' unusual strength coupled with her claws digging into his back is making it much harder for him to do. Our protagonist tries to endure it as best as he can, but secretly on the inside he's calling out for his mother to save him as he wasn't prepared to be hugged by a woman for the first time in his 3 lives. After gathering herself, Zediris thanks Vandalou for saving her from the men and leads them back to her village. She goes on to inform the young boy that despite being a ghoul, she never experienced such pain from the magic item. Vandalou asks if ghouls are considered an undead, but Sam explains to him that ghouls are closer to vampires, to which Zediris agrees and explains how they share the same bloodline with vampires, their ancestor being the twin sister to the direct offspring of goddess Vita and Zakart. Vandalou adds how his mother told him that ghouls are rarely seen outside of their villages, and Zediris agrees, but still found herself in an unfortunate situation with those adventurers, and wonders if they'd mate with anyone like orcs. Vandalou disagrees as he sees her as being really attractive. This makes Zediris blush as she wonders if what she's experiencing is what they call a vampire's charm. She tells the boy that she's an old woman, which prompts Vandalou to ask her age, which turns out to be 290 years old. She goes on to explain that a ghoul's lifespan is 300 years, so she doesn't have that much longer to live, which bums out poor Vandalou. As they continue to travel, the group encounters a small army of beast men traveling towards them. Zediris says how it's the boys from her village, but both the tribe members and Vandalou's bone army go on the defensive when confronted up close. One of the tribe members explains how they came to rescue her after Vilda's group informed them what happened, and he immediately questions why she's leading outsiders to their village. Vandalou questions how the burly lion men are also ghouls, to which Sam informs him that the males look vastly different from the ghoul women. Zediris commands for the ghouls to drop their weapons, as they are in the presence of her saviors, and how Vandalou is the one leading the undead. Then, stepping out from the crowd was a tall ghoul, who Zediris calls Vagaro, who tells Zediris that she's needed back at the village as the chief. However, Zediris was willing to give her position to him since she's going to die soon. Vagaro tells her to stop speaking nonsense and that despite his strength, none of the tribe members would let him become chief. The two go back and forth for a while until Vagaro asks what they should do with Vandalou's group, since allowing outsiders to their village is taboo. Zediris says how she wishes to welcome them as honored guests, even though Vagaro was hesitant to allow that. But upon sensing no immediate threat from Vandalou, he allows it. After unleashing a terrifying roar to let the other members know of their plans, Vagaro leads the undead group back to their village. The celebration festival is in full swing in the honor of Vandalou and his team for rescuing their chief from danger. Vagaro offers Vandalou some of the cooked meat to show sincerity, but Vandalou politely declines. He admits that he's grateful for the gesture, but he doesn't really want to take it since it's actually the meat from the dead adventurers. He thinks to himself that despite their village looking similar to a typical human village, they're still ghouls and even eat human meat so casually. After declining the food, some of the village girls quickly surround Vandalou and shower him in affection as thanks for saving their chief. The girls nearly tear Vandalou apart trying to smother him, and he thinks about the natural charm he has on women and figures he can die peacefully in this life. Later inside of the wagon, Vandalou informs his mother how their group will be staying at the village until spring, to which his mother isn't comfortable with since it's filled with ghouls, and Vandalou has no control over them. If they ever got hungry, they could devour him. Vandalou doesn't think that his life is in danger and even says how he'll study magic under Zediris to learn a few new spells. Darcia asks why doesn't her son just register in a magic guild in Orbom Kingdom, but Vandalou says that it'll be a bad idea for him to do that since he'll need an ID to register with them, and that ID would reveal all of his information including his death magic, which he doesn't think exists in the current world. And thanks to the curse God put on him, he could be at risk for becoming an experiment again. His mother begins to understand and wishes for him to just be careful for her sake. That night, the village women continue to surround Vandalou and ask if they could dress him up as a girl and cut his hair, which is something he is greatly against. That's when another woman named Bastia returns to the village with a sack of meat for the village to eat. She notices Vandalou and asks who that thing is, and wonders if he's a ghost. One of the other women explains how he is super strong and even saved the village chief, piquing the tall woman's interest. She steps to Vandaloo, who couldn't help but admire her impressive muscles, and she thanks him for saving her mother, Dᴇᴇsᴛ. After taking him inside, Bastia begins preparing the meat for Vandaloo and asks him if he likes it. Vandaloo doesn't have any strong opinions for or against the meat, basically concluding it's painfully average. Still, though, he fakes a smile and compliments her meal. Bastia is shocked by his response since everyone else hates her cooking, which makes Vandaloo regret not being more straightforward. After talking for a while, Bastia tells Vandaloo that she has to finish cleaning, which puzzles the boy since he heard that she was the best warrior of the tribe. Bastia admits that she has the lowest rank in all of the tribe, which makes Vandaloo question that since her mother is the chief. She explains how in their tribe, the men hold the power and the women only learn magic, and despite her fighting skills being immaculate, her magic is really weak. Still, she talks about wanting to get pregnant as soon as possible so she can avoid doing the chores and use her free time for training. Vandaloo asks why she's in such a rush. Bastia replies that she's 25 years old and normally women of their tribe become mothers much younger, basically saying how she's becoming too old. Vandaloo disagrees with her and says that she's overthinking things and even calls her beautiful. Bastia thanks him for the compliments but says that Vandaloo is too young to have seeds, something that nearly made Vandaloo choke on his food. He tells her how he's surprised by what she said, which she doesn't get yet. She suddenly remembers how Vandaloo could use unfamiliar magic and asks if he could give her his seed through magic, or perhaps let certain parts of his body grow up. Vandaloo finally rejects her offer. After that embarrassment, Dᴇᴇsᴛ apologizes for her daughter's behavior, but questions how despite his age, he was still able to understand what she meant. Something that Vandaloo didn't think about since he's actually supposed to still have the mentality of a 1-year-old. Still though, Dᴇᴇsᴛ regrets trying to force motherhood onto her daughter and explains how, unlike humans who can choose their partners, it's much harder for a ghoul to become pregnant, which could put their entire race in danger. Vandaloo then asks if ghouls wouldn't know who their father is. But Dᴇᴇsᴛ says it's not like that, and says that the father of her daughter is Vagaro. She goes on to explain how she and Vagaro had done the deed and warns Vandaloo the dangers of getting too drunk. Dᴇᴇsᴛ switches the topic back to magic and asks Vandaloo to replicate the spell he cast on the adventurers. After casting the spell, Dᴇᴇsᴛ is shocked to see the boy cast a spell without chanting it first, and Vandaloo explains that it's because of his chant cancel skill. She wonders how a boy his age has access to that type of skill and wonders if he's some sort of genius or perhaps a demon. But Vandaloo says that he doesn't know why he has that skill, and it's just something that he knows how to do. After explaining his death magic to her, Dᴇᴇsᴛ questions if it really exists, and wonders if she can teach him anything, since he would be skilled at manipulating magic as well as non-elemental magic. This catches his attention, and he asks about non-elemental magic. She says how it's basic magic knowledge, but Vandaloo reminded her that despite his power, he's still just a beginner. Agreeing to teach him, she asks what his magic power amount is, to which he replies that it's 100 million, very casually. Dᴇᴇsᴛ is completely stunned by his insane capabilities, as she only had around 10,000. But regardless of that, she agrees to begin his training. Spring has nearly come, as 6 months have passed since Vandaloo and his group started staying in the ghoul village. Vagaro notes about how much stronger they've all become thanks to Vandaloo using his magic to preserve the meat that they eat. He comments on how abnormal the child is as he pops out of the ghoul's mane as they stand over the edge of a cliff. Vagaro suddenly remembers something and asks the young boy what he thought of his daughter, Bastia. Vandaloo goes on to compliment her impressive physique extensively, and all the while Vagaro thinks about if it weren't for the boy's age, he would have offered him as many women as his heart could desire in order to force him to stay in the village. We then see Vagaro enthusiastically enter Dᴇᴇsᴛ's hut, asking if Vandaloo is still continuing his training in the village. Dᴇᴇsᴛ says that he is, which excites the ghoul as he wonders if the boy would perhaps stay all throughout spring and maybe even summer. Dᴇᴇsᴛ notices the ghoul's unusual behavior and teases him about it. Vagaro complains about how she wouldn't understand how he felt, but Dᴇᴇsᴛ explains that she does. How she too wants Vandaloo to stay in the village with them, but understands that if he chooses to leave, then there's nothing they can do. We cut back to the present as Vagaro scopes the ongoing battle from the cliffside. His tribe members are busy fighting other beastmen and notice how they're struggling with coordinating their attacks. But despite Vandaloo suggesting that they should help them, Vagaro says that his men won't learn anything if he steps in. Meanwhile, down on the battlefield, we see Rita and Saria performing much better as capable soldiers. On the sidelines, Sam is watching proudly as 2 of his daughters become stronger even after his death. Just then, we see Chief Kobold approach one of the girls and the two clash weapons. However, she becomes surrounded by another warrior joining the battle and charges towards her at the same time. Luckily, her sister swoops in and cuts through the warrior with a single slash of her halberd. The two sisters both join forces and attack the chief until a ghoul warrior appears behind him and launches a surprise attack. From afar, W쏘ɪᴛ determines that the battle is already won, as the kobold chief is losing the will to fight. Just then, stalking through the bushes was another warrior who joined the battle, letting out a roar that swept through the field, even surprising W쏘ɪᴛ. Appearing on the field was Gaion, the kobold king, rank 5. Vandaloo urges them to join the battle to help the ghouls, but W쏘ɪᴛ suggests that they should just stand firm and support them with magic. However, Vandaloo says that his men won't be able to escape without him. This fills the ghoul's spirit as he launches himself onto the battlefield and charges straight for the king, clashing their weapons fiercely in a locked battle. Saria says that her and her sister should help out W쏘ɪᴛ, but Rita says that they can't due to the enemies being rather persistent. The sisters look to the Bone Army to help out in the battle, and we see the undead army now much stronger and ranked 4. The bone creatures swiftly leapt into the battle and tore into their enemies. Vandaloo uses his magic to raise the ground and mercilessly bury some of the kobold warriors under the dirt alive. Even the ghouls thought that that was a bit cruel. Meanwhile, W쏘ɪᴛ and the kobold king continue to clash their weapons. The king narrowly sliced some of W쏘ɪᴛ's mane, accidentally revealing Vandaloo dangling inside of the creature's mane. Taking his opportunity, W쏘ɪᴛ charges his weapon and slashed at the king's chest, letting the blood splatter to his face and tasting it. W쏘ɪᴛ promises to cook his enemy's flesh before eating it after the battle. This enrages the king and he powers up, breaking past his limits. The two continue to clash, but Vandaloo could tell that W쏘ɪᴛ doesn't stand a chance based on pure strength alone. We cut to the time where Zadiris teaches Vandaloo about the magic orb technique. He explains how he would have to harden his magic into the shape of a sphere and launch it at the opponent. And since it has no element, it'll affect anybody. Vandaloo tries to perform the spell but struggles with it, and he realizes it's more difficult than he thought. Zadiris explained how before, Vandaloo thoughtlessly used his death magic and that not granting an element to his magic would be harder for him. Still, she encourages the boy to continue working hard at it. Shifting back to the battle, Vandaloo says how he still can't control the magic orb well enough and has to think about what he can do for now. Stepping out of W쏘ɪᴛ's mane, he stands before the kobold king and spits into the creature's open wound. The kobold king at first stares blankly at Vandaloo, before becoming angry and raising his weapon to strike the child. However, he loses control of his hand and drops his weapon to the ground. Following his hand, he begins to lose all of the feeling of his arm. Taking the opportunity, W쏘ɪᴛ decapitates the king and takes victory over the battle.